welcome to Traditional Painting the Digital Way. This is where I use digital painting apps to teach traditional painting techniques. This is part 4 of my gold mask series, and in this video we're going to work on refining the rose. If you're following along traditionally, check out part 1 in this series where I have a list of all the paint and the canvas and all the materials that I use for traditional painting. The app that we're going to be using is Corel Painter 2018, and we're going to go ahead and start working on the dark shadows in the rose. And I'll be using sort of a burnt umber color for this, or just kind of a darker brown shade of yellow ochre maybe. Use some of your yellow ochre and add in a little bit of some dark brown to it. So here I'm using the blender bristle brush. Say that 3 times fast. But anyway, it makes a really good oil painting look with this brush. And I'm also using the opaque acrylic brush, and this just helps add the more solid highlight color. So if you're following along traditionally, the brush that you probably want to use is a number 8 filbert and maybe your short script brush. And you just want to keep adding dark and light highlights to your rose here. And go ahead and look at your photo reference to see the shapes of the petals and where the shadows are going to be in the rose, and keep adding a burnt umber color, and you can also use probably burnt sienna and maybe just a little bit of yellow ochre, maybe add all those colors together. We just kind of want a soft brown look for the shadows in our rose. And I'm switching back and forth between the blender bristle and the opaque acrylic brush, and I'm also using just add water number 2, and this helps smudge in the shadows and make things look softer and not quite as harsh, because you want your shadows to look really soft on this rose. You don't want it to look like lines, because we're trying to get really soft edges on this white rose here. And so just keep on using a blending technique, and if you're following along traditionally, you can smudge with your finger or a paper towel, just anything to kind of keep the lines sort of soft, because we don't want the hard lines, because that makes it look more like a drawing, and we want it to look more like a oil painting. And of course, if you're using oil paint, then it will, but if you're using acrylic, the smudging will help it make an oil painting texture, but you don't have to wait for it to dry, which is what I like about acrylics. But anyway, I'm just continuing to do this, going back and forth and hunting pockets of dark and light on the flower, just looking at my photo reference here to find all the right shapes for the petals. And you just continue to do that until you finally get your flower shape exactly the way you want it. And I'm working a little bit on the edges of the petals here, and you just have to go back and sort of reshape the petals until you get the shape that you're looking for. And it takes a little bit of a while actually to get it refined, because sometimes you have the petals too big or you have them too small, and so you want to go ahead and just keep working on them. And fortunately, if you mess up, you just go back with some white paint or some dark paint and smudge it in, and then just keep on going till you get the shape of the rose that you want. And just keeping the edges kind of soft here, you want, and maybe a little bit transparent, and the blender bristle brush really works well for that. But you might want the edges just a little bit transparent, just to give it the look of rose petals that are really thin. And then I also need to work on the leaves here. So I went ahead and kind of used some of the background color and worked on the shape of the leaves. I didn't want them quite so big next to the mask. So I used some of the dark blue background color just to erase some of that paint there that I didn't want. And you can do this traditionally too. Just get some of your background color. Now it's harder because sometimes you have to match it. And of course, if you're using it digitally, you just use your eyedropper tool. But you know, if you have to go back traditionally, then just go ahead and mix up some paint as close as you can get. And if it's not exactly the same, then add that color around in the background so that it's spread out throughout your painting. And then it looks like it's just part of the background and you actually meant to do that. Just don't tell anybody that you didn't. And here I'm going ahead and adding a little bit of green to the leaves here. And you can probably use phthalo yellow green for this. And we're just kind of trying to make the different colors that you can see in the rose leaves there, and add a little bit of darker reds, maybe some alizarin crimson. Just kind of smudge all that in there because we just want different patches of color on the leaves. As you can see in the photo reference, that there's greens and darker reds and sort of even like purplish colors in it. So just keep adding that and add in the greens in sort of a vein pattern, and then you can add a little bit of the darker red again, and just keep going back and forth, smudging that in till you get the colors that you want for your leaves. And I'm using a very small brush for this, and you would probably use your short script brush or your long script brush for this. And I'm using just add water to smudge it in, and then you want to go ahead and add the vein pattern with a lighter paint color. So I'm using a really light green, probably phthalo yellow green with a lot of white mixed in it. And I'm smudging it in a little bit, but not completely destroying the whole vein pattern, because we want it to look subtle, but we still want that pattern of leaf veins there. And I'm also making the edges of the leaves a little bit more jagged, and you can use your long script brush for that if you're following along traditionally. Here I'm working a little bit more on the rose petals and trying to adjust the shape just a little bit more, adding a little bit more pink to the leaves there, and leaving a little bit transparent on the edges. That just kind of gives it the oil painterly look that we want. And just adding a little bit of green also to the rose, because they have a little bit of a green tint on them. Sometimes the white roses do. And then just smudge it in with your just add water number 2. And I was using the palette knife just a little bit because it gives kind of a transparent look. And then I went back to the blender bristle brush and just smudged in a little bit more dark, just deepening the shadows a little bit, just to give that rose a little bit more of a 3D form there, but keeping the edges soft. We want the edges to be soft for this rose. And then go ahead and save it, because your program might crash. And then I'm going ahead and adding some highlights on the edges of the roses here, and you can use yellow ochre for that and add a lot of white for it. And then here I was trying to add the highlight on the nose, and this is why you always save frequently, because as I was trying to do this, my whole Corel Painter program locked up, and then I couldn't do anything, and I was trying to save it, and I actually lost this last little bit of work that I did because the whole thing crashed. So save frequently. So this is the end of part 4 of my gold mask series. And in the next part, we're going to go ahead and finish out the painting, add the final details to the mask, and the final details to the rose. So thanks everybody for watching. Thank you so much for your support. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments down below, and I will catch you later.